It's 1945. The war is almost over. Allied forces are closing in from the west, the Soviet Red Army is crushing through the east, and Adolf Hitler's Third Reich is crumbling. The Nazi Empire is weeks away from total collapse. But stop. Just for a moment, ask yourself, what if it hadn't ended that way? What if Nazi Germany had gotten the bomb first? This is not just a thought experiment. It almost happened. The Nazi atomic program, known as the Uranium project, was a real effort to develop nuclear weapons. And the only reason it failed, involves a tiny factory in the mountains of Norway, a handful of brave men, and a substance called heavy water. To understand the story, you need to understand what heavy water actually does. Nuclear fission, splitting uranium atoms, releases enormous energy. But to sustain a chain reaction, you need to slow down the neutrons released in the process. Scientists call this a moderator. The Nazis chose heavy water, chemically D2O, as their moderator of choice. Heavy water looks identical to regular water. You could hold it in your hand and never know the difference. But it is fundamentally distinct at the atomic level, hydrogen atoms replaced by deuterium, a heavier isotope. And in the hands of nuclear physicists, it was the key to building a reactor. The key, potentially, to building a bomb. These two men changed the world in December 1938. Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann, working together in a Berlin laboratory, became the first to successfully split the uranium atom. They had just unlocked nuclear fission. And the Nazi regime was watching very closely. There was only one place in the world producing heavy water in industrial quantities, the Vemork hydroelectric plant in Telemark, Norway. The Germans knew this. When they occupied Norway in 1940, Vemork became one of the most strategically important sites in the world. They immediately increased heavy water production to maximum capacity. Perched on a cliff face above a deep gorge, Vemork seemed almost untouchable. The only road in crossed a single narrow bridge, easily defended, easily destroyed. Allied command had a problem. They needed to stop the heavy water supply. But how do you destroy something so well guarded, in such an impossible location? Meanwhile, in America, the scientific community was alarmed. Albert Einstein himself had written to President Roosevelt warning that nuclear chain reactions could lead to weapons of unimaginable destructive power. The Manhattan Project had begun. But Allied intelligence knew the Germans were ahead in some areas, and Vemork's heavy water was feeding their program every single day. The physics was brutal and unforgiving. The Schrödinger equation, the uncertainty principle, these weren't abstract ideas. They were the mathematical blueprint for weapons that could erase entire cities. The race was real. And the Germans were running it. In February 1943, a Norwegian sabotage team, trained by the British Special Operations Executive, made one of the most daring raids of the entire war. They crossed miles of frozen mountain terrain in brutal winter conditions, descended into the gorge, crept into the plant, and destroyed the heavy water production equipment. Not a single shot was fired. Not a single life lost. The Nazis were not helpless. Their engineering was extraordinary. The V-2 rocket program proved they could build weapons of devastating technical sophistication. If heavy water had kept flowing, if their reactor had gone critical, if their physicists had cracked the final steps, the V-2 could have carried something far worse than conventional explosives. But sabotage alone wasn't enough. The Germans repaired the plant and resumed production. The Allies bombed Vemork from the air. And when the Nazis finally decided to ship their remaining heavy water stock to Germany by ferry across Lake Tinzjö, Norwegian resistance sank the ferry. The heavy water went to the bottom of the lake. The program never recovered. By 1945, it was over. Not just because of armies and generals, but because of scientists who understood what was at stake, soldiers who crossed frozen mountains in the dark, and ordinary people who chose resistance over compliance. The Nazis never got the bomb. But the margin was thinner than most people know. And the reason it failed, started with a tube of heavy water in a factory on a Norwegian cliff. Vemork, Norway. The place where the bomb that never was, died.